Greetings. I'd like to make a public statement, along with my colleague Fergus Harlow, on the crisis in Burma, specifically about Aung San Suu Kyi, the imprisoned state counselor and Nobel Peace Laureate, as her Orwellian faux trial commences somewhere in the country of Myanmar. In light of the one-year anniversary of the 2021 military coup d'etat in Myanmar, and due to being asked numerous times to comment in the media on the crisis, and more specifically about Aung San Suu Kyi, we wish to make this statement. There are several points we feel compelled to make at this time of increasing media manipulation and political censorship globally. And there are others, including the heroic defensive war by the people of Burma, the population, against the country's terrorist leader, Min Aung Hlaing, MAH, and his terrorist group, State Administrative Council, SAC, also known as MASAC. Point one, accusations that Burma's state counselor, Aung San Suu Kyi, did not speak out about the Rohingya crisis as patently false. Point two, accusations that Aung San Suu Kyi was both power-hungry and a nationalist are also incorrect. Aung San Suu Kyi and her government were misrepresented in the media to the point of equivalence with a calculated smear campaign. More airtime was given to the spectacle of a fallen icon than to the interests of the country she represented, and this had a direct detrimental impact on the peace process. The National League for Democracy, NLD, their policy of national reconciliation was not taken into account when leveling criticisms, giving a confused picture without context. NLD efforts to tackle the Rohingya crisis were deliberately ignored to create more newsworthy stories in keeping with narratives and agendas pursued by the press. The United Nations consistently pursued its own agenda to the detriment of Myanmar's emergent democracy, issuing demands to Myanmar as attested to by both Britain and France during an emergency UN meeting. The statement. Accusations that Aung San Suu Kyi didn't speak out on the Rohingya crisis are categorically incorrect. She spoke out publicly on many occasions. What she did not do was to take the side of the Rohingya, which is what the Western press demanded of her. Why this demand was made is unclear, although it should be obvious that it serves various political agendas, not least the narrative or the need to save face after decades of bombing Muslims. It is our view that the Rohingya served as a vessel for the appeasement of our collective guilt and as an opportunity for reparative moral grandstanding. They were a handy token in a country most people are unfamiliar with, and few people would be in the know enough to offer any correction. This should be evident from the Associated Press report detailing mass graves that didn't exist, and for which I believe a retraction has yet to be made. This is not to say that what happened to the Rohingya was excusable. What they experience, what they continue to experience, is absolutely horrendous. Likewise, the accusation that Aung San Suu Kyi is a nationalist is simply lazy journalism that doesn't take into account the obvious geopolitical concerns of the region. It is our view that Western interest felt slighted by Aung San Suu Kyi's friendly relationship with Russia, India, and China, Burma's immediate neighbors, and that people were genuinely surprised when she didn't immediately offer allegiance to Western democracies and economic interests. When David Cameron flew over in 2010, not with diplomats, but with business people, I'm sure he was expecting a more lucrative return. Yes, criticisms can be made of the NLD leadership style, but it was a desperate situation, commanded by people who mostly spent the last 20 years in prison. Yes, the power of the NLD government may have been held in too few hands. Economic policies may have been weak. Voices may not have been heard. Such is the lot of those escaping decades of totalitarian brutality and operating as a parallel government with little control. The latter point is crucial. In our time covering the crisis, we did not see a single article critical of Aung San Suu Kyi and the NLD's response that explained the NLD had no control over the police, over the military, or the three ministries in charge of border affairs and homeland security. Not one, other than the Irrawaddy. The press has little need for diplomacy, earning its crust through sensationalist polemics and diatribes. A state councillor must carefully weigh the issues on both sides and remain impartial. That was her job as a politician, a role she valued much higher than that of a global darling of democracy. The plight of the ethnic Rakhine was barely covered. Barely any mention was made of the deliberate creation of an international incident by the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army, ARSA, in Rakhine State, a terrorist group set on founding a separate Islamic state in the region and who had direct connections to Al-Qaeda. Key findings were omitted, and these included the willingness of ordinary Muslim villagers to participate in slaughter, and the death threats we hear were leveled at other Muslims if they did not burn Muslim homes, as demanded by ARSA itself. Instead, the Western reader was treated to a buffet of hearsay from human rights giants such as Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, who used their platforms to advance rumors as if they were fact. For instance, satellite images of burned down homes were used as evidence of the military committing genocide, bolstered with cliched phrases like, quote, "no smoke without fire," without a single mention anywhere that this was very likely also a terrorist tactic, that numerous villages and villagers, either willingly or through coercion, were involved in the attacks, and that both Rohingyas and Buddhists had committed wide-scale arson is the burning of each other's homes during the Miktila riots. Barely anyone mentioned that Aung San Suu Kyi herself commissioned Kofi Annan to conduct an impartial investigation into how to bring peace to the area. a report that was released mere hours before the attacks, and which we believe is the reason ARSA launched the attacks when they did. As for pursuing alternative avenues to address the crisis, something she was accused of not doing during her time in The Hague, aside from the Kofi Annan report, there was a full-scale redevelopment operation in effect, with the support of numerous Burmese business leaders as well as both Buddhist, Muslim clergy, working in harmony to address the actual socio-economic causes of the crisis. This was a massive operation, including many diverse elements of the civil and business sectors to offer long-term solutions to the immediate problems for the sake of both communities. Spokespeople for the NLD repeatedly said they would prove the truth of their commitment to the Muslim community through the work they were doing. In all likelihood, the public will now never hear of that work. Further, taking the, quote, talking stories of displaced refugees living in camps, in part populated by these same terrorists, as the only evidence at the time of many of the crimes now in public awareness, is worse than lazy journalism. It actually stoked the fire. It played into the hands of evil. Scores of camp and village leaders were beheaded or otherwise killed by these terrorists. Think of the reality for ordinary refugees who have a television camera pointed at their face while terrorists look over their shoulder. Think of the pressure real-life politicians turned up in the country with these talking points implanted in their heads as fact because their intel was coming from newspapers. Numerous Nobel Peace Prize laureates were suckered in by a motive furor. They lost their critical thinking skills. They did not question. They reacted. Because of this, I fully agree with the Myanmar government removing Aung San Suu Kyi from the role of special rapporteur and from the country, not least because she went on Twitter to decry the release of imprisoned soldiers who had not been released. Her Twitter comment was immediately picked up by numerous outlets such as the Washington Post and the New York Times. It spread widely and remained in public imagination. I believe no retraction was made beyond deleting the comment over a week later. This was the least of her inaccuracies. She asked, "Where is justice?" I ask the same question. When barred from the country, this is what Lee said, quote, "I am puzzled and disappointed by this decision by the Myanmar government. This declaration of non-cooperation with my mandate can only be viewed as a strong indication that there must be something terribly awful happening in Rakhine, as well as in the rest of the country," end of quote. This is patently a straw man argument. She knew full well why the decision was made, as did we at the time, following assiduously every report that came out of Burma daily for years. Valid criticisms were made and went unreported. I have been in many arguments, but have rarely been puzzled by people's counters without a personal, emotional reason for being so, simply making it plain where relevant that we don't see eye to eye. Her comment is contemptuous posturing, Note the line, quote, "It can only be viewed." This denies the place of critical thinking. It is a polemic and illustrative of the strong-arm attempt to control the narrative at the expense of people's lived experience in Myanmar. When the Associated Press, who we mentioned reported on mass graves that didn't exist, published Aung San Suu Kyi's paraphrased comments from a public address with a simple comma omitted, the same thing happened. Newspapers around the world and NGOs and insiders famous for defending Myanmar jumped on their platforms to tell the world Aung San Suu Kyi was a racist who blamed terrorism on illegal immigration. To us, they appeared far too eager for this slander to be the truth. To quote the Irrawaddy, quote, "The Associated Press on Monday misquoted and seriously misrepresented comments made by State Councillor Daw Aung San Suu Kyi in her speech to the ASEM Foreign Ministers meeting in Naypyidaw. This misleading report immediately drew the ear of the Myanmar Press Council, which condemned the news agency's, quote, purposeful misinterpretation with an ulterior motive to hurt her image and to hurt the image of Myanmar." That's Chaw Pyo Tha on November 21, 2017. For clarity, here are the two statements, the second directly attributed to Aung San Suu Kyi by the Associated Press. The first is Aung San Suu Kyi. "Conflicts around the world are giving rise to new threats and emergencies, illegal migration, spread of terrorism and violent extremism, social disharmony, and even the threat of nuclear war." And the AP says, "The world is facing instability and conflict in part because illegal immigration spreads terrorism." Aung San Suu Kyi, in our view, was being punished for not taking sides. Yet taking sides is clearly not the point in a conflict situation that involves two communities, both equally affected by socio-political and economic hardships, who are both at war with each other. Taking sides is what you do at football games. This refusal to take sides further reflects the NLD policy of national reconciliation, which included a policy of non-demonization of the army. It was an attempt to allow megalomaniacs to save face and beat a hasty retreat with their millions. This actually relied on international support and understanding. And I wrote as early as 2016 that a looming power grab would easily allow the military junta to regain power in 2020. Had Aung San Suu Kyi remained an icon, or at least been understood, there would have been a massive outcry about her current situation. The Burmese army, like all modern armies, has had training and clearly understands the role of perception management and psychological warfare. The Rohingya crisis was allowed to spiral out of control to, in our opinion, tarnish Aung San Suu Kyi's reputation and leave the impression that only a military response would bring peace to the region. It was a deliberate attempt to kneecap the National League for Democracy. Whatever Aung San Suu Kyi said in The Hague, she did not deny wrongdoing on the part of Burma's military, the Tamada, in her role as state counselor. Special courts were set up specifically to look into their crimes. Charges were leveled, arrests were made, and soldiers were sentenced. This is but one of many points she had to labor. Aung San Suu Kyi specifically requested the country be allowed the time and space to do this in an effort to allow the Tamada, the military, to redress its historic impunity and move, slow as it was, towards democracy. And this was actually happening. The Tamada was actually making its own efforts to address these crimes. Further, she did not, quote, block independent investigations. Another UN accusation at The Hague, in a general sense. She specifically refused to allow the UN to escalate the situation through its one-sided fact-finding mission. The UN repeatedly framed the issue as a one-sided attack on a single minority. This was not the reality on the ground. It will never be the reality on the ground. Buy ink by the barrel, and you will never cover the blood spilled on that ground. There is no escaping culpability of both the UN and Western press for their part in preventing the resolution of the crisis. For the UN to speak of Aung San Suu Kyi refusing to use her moral authority in the face of these gross inaccuracies is basically gaslighting a whole country. Note how generalized the UN comments from the Hague transcripts are, as if the UN speaks for the whole world when it's talking about its own agenda, specifically its own fact-finding mission. Consider this picture when you consider Aung San Suu Kyi voluntarily going to The Hague at a time when the whole world had turned its back on her. Think in the basest, barest psychological terms, please. Never mind Bono, never mind Geldof's vulgar displays of misplaced celebrity insight. Every institution that supported Aung San Suu Kyi stripped her of her awards and standing. She claimed she was not moved by this, and we do not believe her. Personally, it would have broken our hearts. I was asked by a journalist, what has happened to the woman we knew? Her words in the Hague transcripts are so cold. You ask why she is cold? This is like poking someone in the eye and asking them, why are you screaming? Aung San Suu Kyi was widely accused of cozying up to the military, being power hungry. Yet she was practicing diplomacy. She was attempting to negotiate with psychopathic warlords. What looks to some like Stockholm Syndrome looks to me like a woman who has for too long courted psychopaths and who bears the hallmarks of a radically abusive relationship. Had I spent 20 years in detention and house arrest, lost my family, and witnessed and felt so much brutality, only to have the Western media junta, flay me publicly with my own words. I too would lack emotional effect, placed on a stand and accused of genocidal intent. We easily imagine a deflated, dejected woman who no doubt she knew her days were numbered. Don't forget that one of her chief lawmakers, U Ko Nyi, a Muslim, who had devised ways to amend the undemocratic military constitution, was assassinated in broad daylight at a busy airport in Rangoon with his grandchild in his arms. Death threats, we heard, were common for those in Aung San Suu Kyi's inner circle. She lacked international support at a time when the military junta was poised to do what they have done, what they have always done, and what we have let them continue to do. Our affinity with her democratic mission was her and her country's principal insurance. We stripped that of her as we stripped it from the thousands of people currently being tortured in the prisons all across Burma. Her famous quote, initially a thank you for the support, now takes on a new meaning. Quote, to be forgotten is to die a little. It is to lose some of the links that anchor us to the rest of humanity. I believe that psychologically, she has indeed died a little. None of us know what she holds in her heart. She is alone right now, forgotten in a prison cell, where she will die, very likely die there. Worse, I say this with a heavy heart, worse, I can hear her detractors practically cheering. We crucified another pretender. Her sons will never see her again. Her country is being ripped apart by civil war. Student protesters are jumping to their deaths from buildings rather than being arrested. And the world asks where the light has gone. We ask, when will the world account for its misstep? When will the world retrieve its conscience from the mire of tabloid ignorance and uninformed opinion, from its sound bites and sensationalism, and take up the fight again, demanding the immediate release of Daw Aung San Suu Kyi and all democratically elected leaders in this government, along with every other prisoner of conscience. Bono, Geldof, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, women Nobel laureates, world leaders, celebrities, influencers, ambassadors at the United Nations. Your silence echoes deafeningly in the torture chambers of the country you have so easily forgotten. Freedom lovers worldwide, it is time for us to speak out and boycott boycott. Boycott everything military in Myanmar, in Burma. These are about 2,500 words distilled from our 500,000 word 4-volume set of books, Burma's Voices of Freedom, recently published by World Dharma Publications. Please refer to those volumes, if you're moved, for a complete analysis of what we have expressed here and so much more, including 125,000 words directly from Aung San Suu Kyi, along from long-form conversations that I did with U Tinu, U Win Tin, Zinmar Aung, Minko Nine, U Win Tain, Ko Jimmy, recently sentenced to death, Zayathal, also sentenced to death, Ma Thida, and dozens of other heroic revolutionaries. Volume 5 will start from February 1st, 2021, and it's titled, The War is On. And this is a statement from myself, Alan Clements, my colleague and co-author of the books, Fergus Harlow, Burma's Voices of Freedom, an ongoing struggle for democracy. We are just simply bringing the voices of freedom, all the people of Burma who aspire towards universal human rights, unity, peace, and all ethnicities. We are but the authors, we are but the vehicles of bringing these voices to the world in order to act on behalf of the people and democracy in Burma. From my heart to yours, thank you.